Hey, fellow grumpy old gentlemen. 1971, that's my birth year. Um, I was born June 17th of 71, and I was born in the early morning hours on a Thursday, according to my mother. And yeah, I looked, and I've always looked at the movies that were released in 1971, and I thought I had a pretty good year in film. A lot of classic films came out that year. Uh, Many that I won't talk about because there's quite a few. There's more than 10. That's what I'm trying to say. That that I really like. But these are 10 of my favorites, and we'll start off with Sean Connery's return to the James Bond series after George Lazenby's disastrous 1969 epic, my favorite of the James Bond films, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Uh, Sean Connery returned in the summer. Well, no, it wasn't the summer '71. It was released in December of 1971. Diamonds Are Forever. Um, Phoned in performance. Um, Kind of lazy in the role. More lazy than he was in Thunderball, or not Thunderball, You Only Live Twice. Thunderball, you could tell he was getting weary of the role already. You Only Live Twice, although, Thunderball and You Only Live Twice are two of the better Sean Connery movies. You could tell that he was clearly getting bored after playing Bond for 4 or 5 times, and he was definitely bored to tears by the time he agreed to come back. I think they paid him $1 million to come back as Bond, and they was hoping he'd do more, but that was it for him. But I like this movie. It's not one of my. It's probably not in my top 10. Probably just on the outer top 10 of my favorite Bond films, but. Good story. Takes place in and around Las Vegas in the desert. I like the moon buggy scene chase. That's a really good scene. What's her name? Jill St. John. Jill St. John plays Tiffany Case. She's one of the better Bond girls for the time. I never cared too much for the villains, Quint and the other guy, and Blofeld, Charles Gray. He was the worst Blofeld, I think. Telly Savalas was a much better Blofeld, and so was Donald Pleasance. But it's an okay Bond film. I'd still probably give it 3.5 out of 4 stars. Lots of good action scenes, but definitely Sean Connery was, in my opinion, pretty much just sleepwalking in his performance as Bond in this one. And this one, I used to like this one a whole lot more. Probably the first dozen or so times that I watched it growing up, but the last couple times, I still like it, but I like Conquest of the Planet of the Apes more and more over Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which came out in 1971. This is when Cornelius and Zira, they got on the Charlton Heston's space shuttle from the first 2 movies. They fixed it, reprogrammed it, and time traveled back to modern day planet Earth at the time, which was 1971. And you see their adventures and in 1971, and yeah, it's just Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter. They're great as Cornelius and Zira. Great performances, but there's something a little bit off about this one. The ultra-violent ending, it's kind of a bummer. I always thought, heck, they get killed, at the end. You know, I don't think I'm giving anything away. It's almost a 50-year-old film now. I think everybody's seen it. But it introduced Ricardo Montalban at the very end of the film, and he sort of helps them and sets up for the next sequel, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. But yeah, this was the third in the series, the second sequel. I still like the original the best, that came out in '68, and then Beneath the Planet of the Apes came out in 1970, and this came out in '71. Conquest came out in '72, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes came out in '74, I believe. But yeah, this is probably my fourth favorite. Battle for the Planet of the Apes is definitely my least favorite, and then this one, and then Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and Conquest is my second favorite, even though it's really violent too. And these movies were rated G for the time. It always kind of baffled me. You know, they show the apes getting beaten and mistreated, and a lot of humans getting beaten and operated on, lobotomies and things like that. Real touchy subjects, you know, for a children's film. But I think Conquest was rated PG when it came out, but the other ones got G ratings. Yeah, anyway, like this one a lot, but just kind of faded with me over time. And this one definitely hasn't faded on me over time. I discovered this. I bought the VHS used from Blockbuster Video around '94 or '95. It was $4.99. It was on a clearance table, and I watched it, liked it a hell of a lot then, and just appreciated it more and more over time. It's the cult film Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Scream Factory just released this on Blu-ray last month or the month before last, and I immediately ordered it when I found out it was coming out. But it's about a young woman and her husband and her husband's friend. They moved to this house. I believe it's in Connecticut. It's like a big farmhouse, and she's just fresh out of a mental institution. She had like a nervous breakdown or something, and she starts seeing things and doesn't know if they're real or you know, if she's having like a relapse, and you know, just going nuts again. But you know, yeah, it's about vampires and things like that, and it's just a really good atmospheric horror movie from 1971. Paramount released it. Zora Lampart, she plays Jessica, and a really good role. And she never really went on to do any other things. None of the actors did. This was like a drive-in classic. It came and went, and you didn't really hear much about it. It had like a limited home video release in the '80s, and you know, I was lucky enough to find it used, and it's just really developed a cult classic status here in the last few years. But I always thought it was a really good movie. But yeah. And this one I like just mainly. It's not the best cop action detective movie, but it's, you know, just one of those gritty New York filmed movies where you see old New York, you see all the old buildings. Every street corner had a movie theater on it. Some were, you know, mainstream movies, and a lot of them were porno theaters. But it was just great seeing old New York from the '70s, and New York. I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately doesn't look anything like that at the time. Look anything like that now. It's more of a tourist town. It's cleaned up, but if I could go back in a time machine, I'd love to go to New York City in the 1970s just to visit it and hope I wouldn't get robbed or anything, because probably a lot of crime in New York in the 70s. But anyway, 1971's Shaft, with Richard Roundtree playing the detective John Shaft. These are its other two sequels that came out a year or so apart from the original. But good movie, but I prefer the scenery more than anything else. Good story, nice action scenes, but yeah, there's definitely better movies, but just a fun movie to watch, just for the scenery for me. And this is another favorite, and I still haven't opened it yet. I got it last summer. haven't watched this Blu-ray transfer of it yet. But 1971's Clute, with Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland and Roy Scheider in one of his first roles. Directed by Alan J. Pakula. Just a great, another slice of life in New York City in the early 1970s. Jane Fonda, she plays a prostitute that's stalked by a madman killer that's killing her prostitute proteges around her, and she may be next, because she's stalked constantly and harassed. And John Clute, the title character of the movie, he's there to investigate and question her, and they end up sleeping together. But really good movie. I discovered this probably, I think the first time I saw this had to be on VHS in the late 80s, or it might have been late night TV or something. I saw it. I really don't remember, but I always enjoyed this. This was made during the controversy surrounding Jane Fonda and Hanoi Jane and all that nonsense. But say what you will, I think she's a great actress. Always enjoyed her movies. If we listened and paid attention to every actor or actress's political agenda, we wouldn't like anything. Anything that they do or anything anybody does. I try to ignore that and just enjoy them for their work. I know it's hard sometimes, and not everybody will agree with me, but have always been that way. Not political either way. Either you like who you like or you don't. That's up to you. It's your life. My life too. But anyway, great movie from 1971. I really need to crack this open and watch it. Clute. And this, I definitely remember. This is one of the TBS movies I used to watch all the time. And me and my mom, every time it came on, she would always watch it with me. She hardly ever watched movies with me, but Duel was one of them. TBS used to show this, it seemed like twice a month in the 80s growing up, and I probably watched it every time it was on. About Dennis Weaver, he plays a businessman who's on a cross-country trek to go see one of his bosses for a meeting or something, and he's continually chased and harassed by a big 18-wheeler, scary-looking truck driver chasing him. You never do get to see the driver, but you see the truck constantly trying to run him off the road, chasing him just throughout the desert. And this is Steven Spielberg's first feature that he directed. It was released, it was a TV movie of the week in 1971. And after Jaws came out in 1975, it was released theatrically, mainly overseas. It was released in the U.S. too, but it was more popular in overseas markets theatrically. And when this was originally aired in 1971, it was like 74 minutes long, because it was a 90-minute TV movie, and it was 90 minutes with commercials. So the actual feature was just 74 minutes long. And when they decided to release it theatrically, Spielberg went back and added 20 more minutes of footage that he hadn't shot. He went back and reshot with Dennis Weaver some additional scenes. The scene, probably the most famous scene that he done was when the truck was behind Dennis Weaver, and Dennis was in his car, and the truck was trying to push him into an oncoming train that was going across the railroad track. That was a new scene that was added, and the scene, the bus driver scene where the bus was broke down, that wasn't in the original TV broadcast. But just great suspenseful movie. Probably still one of Steven Spielberg's best movies. Put him on the map. The next movie he done after this was a theatrical release, and it was the Sugarland Express with Goldie Hawn. But yeah, always loved Duel. And another slice of life, New York 1970s movie. This 1971, of course, with a very young Al Pacino and Kitty Wynn. Kitty Wynn, of course, probably most famous for The Exorcist. But this movie, Francis Ford Coppola saw this film, and this movie is what got Al Pacino the role of Corleone, Michael Corleone, in the Godfather films. But very gritty, about drug addicts shooting up heroin in an area in New York City known as Needle Park. Probably not there anymore in New York, but I'd like to see a then and now feature or something of what it looked like then and what those areas look like now. I think I've seen a video of that on YouTube. I'll have to look again, but I think I did see a then and now feature on YouTube of the filming locations of Panic and Needle Park. But this is I wouldn't say disturbing, but the drug scenes are kind of hard to watch, where they show them the needles and the veins. There's lots of shots like that. My buddy Harry Benson, Macaphotos on YouTube, he just bought this from Twilight Time, and he had never seen it, and I told him he'll really, really enjoy it. I think he will. I don't know too many people that don't like this movie. But yeah, just Al Pacino's great in it, and a great little soundtrack to it. I just love looking at the old New York locations. Big fan of that. And this is one of the best dark comedies ever made, I think. Really enjoy watching this. A couple times a year I still watch it. George C. Scott's The Hospital. Diana Rigg, this is the first movie she done after her James Bond film, where she played the Bond girl on Her Majesty's Secret Service. That was '69. This came out in '71, of course, and very lovely Diana Rigg. And George C. Scott, he was nominated for Best Actor again in this film, and he won the previous year for Patton, but he turned it down, and he didn't win for his performance in this, but I think this was the better performance, and had he, accepted the award graciously, they may have gave him the award for this, but Gene Hackman won for French Connection for 1971 for his performance. But Patty Chayefsky wrote this, and Arthur Hiller directed it. The first time I saw this movie was on Beta in 1990, I think, and I liked it then, and just one of those movies that the older I get, the more I appreciate it. Just a dark comedy about a chaotic day. I think it takes place like during a day's time, maybe a week's time in a hospital. Lots of deaths, murderers running around, but it's a comedy. like I said, a very dark comedy, kind of twisted. But if you haven't seen this, you really should check it out. It's from Twilight Time, and they're running a sale right now, and I think it's either $9.95 or $14.95. But you grumpy old bastards that don't have this, or excuse me, grumpy old gentlemen that don't have this, you should really consider adding this one to your collection. It's one of the best movies ever made, I think. And this one is the one that Gene Hackman won for his performance as Popeye Doyle, 1971's The French Connection, directed by William Friedkin. And this also starred Fernando Rey as Frog One, and Roy Scheider. He played Gene Hackman's partner. Gene Hackman, very, very memorable character. Popeye Doyle, police detective, takes place in New York City. And you get to see some shots of the World Trade Center just being built. And I always look for them scenes every time I watch it. I think that's kind of cool. Just a World Trade Center just starting to go up. But very gritty cop drama. One of my favorites. And this is my all-time favorite movie from 1971, and it's probably I think it's in my top 10 of all time. If not, it's just in the outer edges of my top 10. But definitely my favorite Stanley Kubrick film. No, well, yeah, maybe, yeah, probably. Definitely one of my two favorite Stanley Kubrick films. But A Clockwork Orange. This one is set in the probably not so distant future now, London, about Malcolm McDowell and a bunch of his droogs just terrorizing England, having sex with whomever and whatever they choose to do, breaking in on people, rape, murder, lots of dastardly evil stuff that they do. But always loved this movie. Saw this in the early 90s on VHS for the very first time. And this is a digibook that Warner released several years ago. One of my favorite digibooks. Lots of cool pictures. This movie isn't for everybody because of the way they, not only the violence in it. Of course, I have nothing at all against violence in a film. If it's there, it's there. If it serves its purpose. But a lot of people don't like the language they use, the way they talk, and that's the way the book. Anthony Burgess wrote the book Clockwork Orange, and I think it came out in like '66 or '67. The book was released, and the book's kind of hard to read too, because the language they use is just fucked up, is what it is. It's kind of hard to understand, and you just got to laugh and go along with it. And if you've seen the movie a number of times, like I have, you pretty much know what they're saying. But yeah, that's it. That's my top 10 from 1971, the year I was born. Some of my other favorites that didn't make the list, of course, was Dirty Harry, the first movie that Clint Eastwood played Dirty Harry Callahan, police detective. Awesome movie. But let's see, what else didn't make my list? The Mega Man. Just watched it a month or so ago, and that's kind of, if you've ever seen the Mega Man, it's kind of what's going on in the world right now with the virus and people dying. The Mega Man kind of close to home right now. But anyway, that's my top 10 from my birth year. And next week, not next year, Next week we'll be doing 1951, and that's Bob's and Mike's birth year. So you get 2-for-1 specials there. So should we do just one top 10 list or two top 10 lists for each of the guys? I'll have to look and see what the hell came out in 1951. I have no idea. But anyway, everybody, hope y'all staying safe and staying at home as much as you can, and be good to each other. Bye.